The night I found out my father had emptied my college fund, I was sitting at the kitchen table with an acceptance letter from Harvard spread in front of me like a ticket to another life. The crimson crest in the corner felt like a promise. You made it. You're going somewhere bigger than this town, bigger than him. But that promise collapsed when I logged into my account. Zero. Did not even a stray dollar left behind. Just a cold, empty balance where the money I'd been told my whole life was waiting for me should have been. My mother had reminded me of it every year when we sat down to fill out school forms. Your father started it when you were born. He wanted you to be secure.
Secure.
What a joke. When I confronted him in his study, he didn't even look guilty. He leaned back in his leather chair, fingers drumming on the mahogany desk, a tumbler of scotch in hand. The room smelled like old books and expensive cologne, a shrine to his success. You spent it. My voice cracked. He swirled the glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light. Invested it, he corrected, like that single word erased the betrayal. Opportunities don't wait around forever. That fund was just sitting there, stagnant. I put it to better use. Better use. My throat tightened. That was my future. He chuckled, low and dismissive. Your future isn't money in an account. Your future is grit. Harvard is still possible, son. If you want it badly enough, you'll figure it out. The arrogance in his tone made my skin burn. He was stealing and calling it a gift. I wanted to scream, to smash the glass out of his hand, to demand he undo what he had done. But his expression told me there was no undoing.
He didn't see this as theft.
He saw it as a lesson. Behind him, shelves lined with financial trophies gleamed, framed magazine covers, plaques etched with his name, photographs of him shaking hands with governors and CEOs. Proof of his untouchability. Proof that in his world, people like him didn't pay for their mistakes. You'll thank me one day, he said, lifting the scotch to his lips. I left before I could cry in front of him. Upstairs, I slammed my door hard enough to rattle the frames on the wall. My sister Lila knocked softly a few minutes later, slipping inside without waiting for an answer. She was 16, sharp-eyed, restless. She sat on the edge of my bed, her notebook clutched to her chest. What happened? She whispered. He took it, I said. All of it. Her face darkened, but she didn't look surprised. Of course he did. She picked at the corner of her notebook. He always finds a way to make everything about him. I dropped my head into my hands. The letter from Harvard lay on my desk, bright against the shadows. I thought of Mom, who would probably retreat into her silence the way she always did when Dad's choices left wreckage behind. I thought of Max, my older brother, who worshipped Dad like a general. He'd probably call me ungrateful for even questioning him. For the first time, I wondered if Harvard wasn't a door opening but one slamming shut. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the muffled sound of my father's laughter drifting up from the study. Every burst of it was a reminder. He had taken my future, repackaged it as a lesson, and expected me to thank him. And part of me knew, even then, that I wouldn't forget. I wouldn't forgive. Harvard wasn't the dream I had carried in my chest since middle school. It wasn't polished brochures, ivy climbing walls, or professors in tweed jackets quoting Emerson under golden autumn leaves. For me, Harvard was exhaustion. It was survival. It was carrying weight that nobody else could see as I moved into my dorm with a duffel bag that looked pitiful beside my roommate's luggage, monogrammed trunks, garment bags bursting with designer clothes, parents snapping photos on brand new iPhones. I stood there with secondhand sheets, a laptop so old it wheezed when I opened it, and a hollow pit in my stomach where security used to live. They talked about pre-orientation trips to Paris and Aspen. I nodded politely and pretended to care. But inside, I wanted to scream. Do you know what my father did? Do you know what it cost me just to stand here? Within weeks, the grind began. Mornings started in the dining hall, not as a student, but as staff. I scrubbed syrup from tables while classmates trickled in wearing sleep-tousled hair and pajama pants. Some waved vaguely at me, not realizing I lived just a few doors down the hall. I'd clock out, swap the uniform for jeans, and sprint to lecture halls where kids scrolled TikTok while professors explained supply and demand. Afternoons, I worked at the bookstore, hauling boxes heavier than my body, shelving textbooks priced higher than my monthly paycheck. At night, I bussed tables at a restaurant on Mass Avenue, the kind of place where finance bros slammed down credit cards without glancing at the bill. My feet blistered inside cheap shoes, my fingers smelled permanently of bleach, and by the time I returned to campus, the libraries were already closing. Sleep became a privilege I couldn't afford. I'd collapse on my mattress, laptop glowing, forcing my eyes to trace lines of assigned reading while the laughter of my dorm echoed through the halls. Their parties, their late-night debates about politics or literature, belonged to a world I wasn't invited to. The worst wasn't the work. It was the way wealth dripped off my classmates, without them noticing. One afternoon in section, a girl in a cashmere sweater complained that her dad wouldn't let her lease a Tesla until spring. Another groaned about her family's ski house being too crowded during the holidays. A boy sitting beside me turned and asked casually, "So you're on full aid, right? That's awesome. My mom says kids like you have the best stories." I smiled thinly, gripping my pen hard enough to snap it. Dad called every Sunday, his voice booming through the line. "How's my Harvard man? You keeping up with the big dogs?" "I'm working 3 jobs, Dad," I'd say. "Good," he'd reply, almost gleeful.
Grit.
"You're learning the way real men learn." I wanted to tell him that grit wasn't noble when it was forced on you by betrayal. That nothing was character building about falling asleep in lecture because you were up until 3 washing dishes for strangers. But his tone told me he wouldn't hear it. He didn't see me. He saw a reflection of his own warped lessons. Mom called sometimes, too, her voice small, careful. "Are you eating? Getting any rest?" She'd whisper, like she was afraid he'd overhear. I wanted her to say more, to scream at him,
To protect me.
but she never did. The bitterness grew heavier with each semester. Debt notices arrived in my inbox like predators stalking me. I ignored them until I couldn't. I pulled more shifts, cut meals, and borrowed from Claire when she insisted. Claire, the only bright thread in the tangle. She'd appear at my desk in Lamont Library with coffee, slide into the seat beside me, and nudge my elbow when my eyes blurred from fatigue. "Keep swimming," she'd whisper. "You've already gone further than most of them ever will." She didn't mean it like Dad did, but her words stuck anyway. There were nights I wanted to quit. Nights I sat at my desk, staring at Harvard letterhead taped above my bed like a cruel joke. Nights I thought about calling him, asking him to admit he'd gone too far to help me the way a father should. But pride sealed my throat. And beneath the exhaustion, something else was forming. It started as a whisper. "He did this to you." He called it a lesson. Prove him wrong. But over time, the whisper sharpened into something darker. Not just survival. Not just endurance. A promise. That one day, he'd regret it. By junior year, exhaustion had stopped feeling temporary. It wasn't something I could sleep off over a weekend. It was part of me now, stitched into my muscles and bones. But alongside the fatigue was something sharper, a restless heat I hadn't felt before. That spark arrived with my internship at a Boston compliance firm. On paper, the job was grunt work, file audits, transaction reports, training sessions where analysts droned about patterns of irregularity. But for me, it was like slipping behind the curtain of a magic trick. Suddenly, the world of money wasn't just an abstraction. It was spreadsheets and signatures, loopholes and lies. I learned to see numbers not as math, but as stories. A sudden spike here meant insider whispers. A shell company there meant someone hiding money where regulators couldn't reach. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving Harvard. I was building skills that belonged to me. Then, one evening in October, I stumbled across a file. I wasn't supposed to be digging that deep, but curiosity had me flipping through archived reports. My eyes snagged on a familiar name buried in a memo, Halstead Capital. My father's firm. The note was brief, just a line about potentially irregular trading activity flagged for follow-up. But my pulse spiked anyway. For years, he had been untouchable. His name on plaques, his face on magazine covers, his voice thundering in boardrooms. But here, in black and white, was proof he wasn't invincible. The thought made my chest tighten with something dangerously close to joy. I didn't act right away. For weeks, I carried that memo like a secret weight, taking it out in my head during lectures, at work, on the T ride home. I imagined him at his desk, glass of scotch in hand, laughing about grit while his empire quietly rotted underneath him. I fantasized about pushing him over the edge, about making him taste the same helplessness he'd forced down my throat. But revenge isn't as clean as fantasy. It asks questions you don't want to answer. One night in the library, I told Claire. "I found something," I whispered, leaning close so no one could hear. "At work. About my dad's firm." Her brow furrowed. Something bad? Something that could ruin him? She studied me, her eyes softer than I expected. "And you're thinking about doing it?" I hesitated, gripping the edge of the desk until my knuckles ached. "He stole everything from me. He calls it grit, but it's theft. He thinks he's untouchable. Maybe he's not." Claire didn't tell me yes or no. She just reached across the desk and put her hand over mine. "If you go through with this, you can't unring the bell. Make sure it's about you, not just him." Her words followed me home that night. Back in my dorm, I sat at my desk, papers spread around me. Slowly, methodically, I pieced together a packet of publicly available filings and timelines, highlighting every inconsistency I could find. By the time I was finished, my printer had spit out 30 pages of neat, damning order. I slid them into a plain envelope. On the front, in block letters, I wrote, "SSF." I held it for days. At night, I kept it under my pillow, as if its presence might seep into my dreams. I thought about tearing it up, tossing it in the trash, forgetting it ever existed. More than once, I almost did. But each time, I remembered his voice. "Harvard is still possible. You'll thank me one day." And the anger rose, hot and uncontainable. On a gray morning in November, I took the T downtown, envelope tucked under my coat. My hands shook the entire ride. At the post office, I hesitated in front of the blue mailbox, my breath fogging in the cold. People passed me, indifferent. The city hummed like it always did. Finally, with a surge that felt equal parts fury and freedom, I dropped the envelope in. The clang of the metal door echoed like a gavel. Walking away, my heart pounded so hard I thought I might collapse. My mouth was dry, my palms damp. I kept glancing over my shoulder as if someone might chase me, snatch me back, undo what I had done. But no one came. The world kept moving. Students hurried to class. A street vendor shouted about hot pretzels. The T rumbled beneath the sidewalk. And inside me, something shifted. I had done it. I had crossed the line. For years, he had believed he was teaching me strength. Maybe he had, but not in the way he imagined. Because now I knew Harvard wasn't the only possible future. So was his downfall. The first tremor was an article in the Wall Street Journal. Sources within the SEC confirm an investigation into irregular trading practices at Halstead Capital. It read. My father's name wasn't in the headline, but it didn't need to be. Anyone in finance knew who ran that ship. I sat in the dining hall, phone buzzing with group texts from classmates dissecting the story. For the first time in years, their attention wasn't on Tesla leases or ski houses. It was on him. On the empire he built with swagger and scotch and speeches about grit. At first, he laughed it off. "Cost of doing business," he said on the Sunday call, his voice booming with bravado. "Happens to all the big players. They sniff around, they find nothing, and I come out stronger. Mark my words." But cracks widened quickly. Another article appeared. Then another. Terms like fraud, shell companies, and insider trading floated in headlines. Anonymous sources leaked that regulators had credible evidence. For the first time, my father's picture appeared beside words like deception and collapse. The empire was shaking, and everyone could see it. By December, reporters were camped outside our suburban house. Neighbors peeked through blinds. Mom stopped going to her yoga studio, afraid of the whispers. My younger brother Max called me one night, his voice breaking.
Did you know? He asked.
The question landed like a blade. I thought about lying, about saying no, pretending I was as blindsided as he was. But my throat clenched shut. Max, I began, but he hung up before I could finish. Mom called next, her voice ragged with exhaustion. They're tearing us apart, she said. The press, the neighbors, the board, your father's unraveling. He drinks more. He barely sleeps. He keeps saying it'll blow over, but she trailed off, and for the first time in my life, I heard something like fear in her voice. Fear not of him, but for him. Meanwhile, Harvard became surreal. Professors slipped me sympathetic looks I didn't ask for. Classmates whispered as I walked by. A kid in the section leaned over and said, "Hey, isn't that your dad in the Times?" As if it were gossip, not my life cracking open. The humiliation burned worse than exhaustion ever had. One afternoon, walking back from the library, it happened. A cluster of reporters was waiting near my dorm gates, cameras flashing. They weren't there for me, but for him, Halstead's son, the Harvard kid who must know something. Questions flew like bullets. Did your father coach you on trades? Was your tuition money tied to insider profits? Are you cooperating with the investigation? I froze, backpack digging into my shoulders, light blinding my eyes. Security shooed them back, but not before the words lodged in my skull. Are you cooperating? I had mailed that envelope weeks ago. I had set the fire they were chasing. That night, I sat on my bed staring at my phone, thumb hovering over his contact. Every Sunday, he had called. That week, the phone was silent. Finally, I called him. When he answered, his voice was gravelly. If you're calling to gloat, don't. I'm not, I said quickly, though maybe I was. You think you're better than me now? With your fancy classes and your part-time jobs? Don't kid yourself. You wouldn't be at Harvard if it weren't for me. His voice rose, sharp and jagged. This family eats because of me. You exist because of me. And now they want to crucify me because I played the game better than the rest. I bit down hard, blood rising in my mouth. You didn't play better. You cheated. You stole from me, from Mom, from all of us. And you called it grit. Silence. Heavy, suffocating. Then he laughed. Not the warm, booming laugh I remembered from childhood, but something cold and broken. Careful, son, he said. The higher you climb, the harder you fall. Don't think Harvard makes you immune. The line went dead. For the first time, I realized he wasn't invincible. Not in the markets, not in the family, not even in his own mind. He was unraveling, and I had pulled the thread. The day the empire collapsed, the news broke like a storm siren. Halstead Capital founder indicted on multiple counts of securities fraud. The headline scrolled across every screen in Harvard Square. On TVs in the dining hall, on phones buzzing in class, even on the ticker at the bank downtown. His face, the same face that had once smiled from glossy magazine covers, now stared out hollow-eyed, framed by words like fraud, scheme, betrayal. I sat in the library, laptop glowing with articles, my chest heavy as if sandbags pressed against my ribs. Around me, whispers grew. Students craned their necks to see, some glancing my way before turning back to their screens. It should have felt like triumph. The man who stole my future, who preached grit while draining my fund, was finally exposed. But it didn't feel clean. It didn't feel finished. It felt like ashes. Mom called that night. Her voice was strained, brittle as glass. He's gone, she said. What do you mean, gone? He disappeared before the indictment hit. Packed a bag, emptied accounts. The marshals came by looking for him. Her breath hitched. Your father's vanished, and I don't know if he's running from the law or himself. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, fighting the surge of emotions clawing at me. Relief, rage, grief, guilt. Days later, a letter arrived. Plain envelope, no return address, postmarked from somewhere in Nevada. The handwriting was unmistakable. Inside, a single sheet. Son. You wanted Harvard. You got it. You wanted grit. You've earned it. Don't waste time hating me. Hate's cheap. You're better off because of me, whether you'll admit it or not. One day you'll see. One day you'll thank me. And then, at the bottom, scrawled like an afterthought, I'm proud of you. My throat tightened. The words were a knife, not healing, not even apologetic, but cruel in their ambiguity. Proud of me for surviving? Or proud of himself for shaping me into something jagged? I tore the letter in half, then into quarters, then into scraps so small they floated like snow into the trash. But even shredded, the words clung to me. At graduation, I walked across the stage in the rented robe, crimson sash heavy across my shoulders. The crowd erupted with cheers for every name, every degree. When mine was called, I heard nothing. No father's whistle. No family applause. Just Claire's sharp, steady clap cutting through the noise. Afterward, as we stood in Harvard Yard with balloons bobbing overhead, she slipped her hand into mine. You made it, she whispered.
Did I?
I wasn't sure. The diploma in my hand felt less like a prize and more like a scar. Proof of survival, not celebration. Because Harvard hadn't been a dream come true. It had been a battlefield. And the war had been waged not against professors or poverty, but against the man who called himself my father. In the years that followed, I carried both burdens, the education and the betrayal. I built a career in compliance, the same field that had given me the tools to bring him down. Every red flag I spotted, every irregularity I flagged, felt like an echo of him, a reminder and a warning. Some nights, I still hear his voice. I'm proud of you. But pride from a man like him isn't a gift. It's a curse, a tether, a chain you have to cut again and again. So I keep moving forward. Because maybe success isn't Harvard. Maybe it isn't revenge. Maybe it's choosing to define yourself without the shadow of the man who tried to own your future.